Agent Morris with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Did you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Sol Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Anomaly-NOW, straight out of Austin, Texas. I am your host, Miles Lewis. This is the sometimes live, mostly weekly news and media roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Anomaly Archives, aka the Scientific Anomaly Institute. It's been about a couple of weeks since we last did a show. This show today is not live, but it is Wednesday, our usual recording time, May 21st, 2025, a Wednesday. You know, because John Keel always said that more UFO sightings happened on Wednesdays. Well, thank you for joining us. Like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, do all those things to help promote this show and our nonprofit, the Anomaly Archives, and its goals of preservation and public education related to all things anomalous, especially UFOs, parapsychology, and all weird realms in between. Again, I'm your host, Miles Lewis. Thank you for joining me. So, as usual, you can go to our website, anomalyarchives.org, but you also might like to go to our Flipboard. That's flipboard.com at Anomaly Archives, and there's a link there that will then take you to our Anomaly Archive Flipboard, which has thousands upon thousands upon thousands of articles linked there that you can surf, read, peruse, to your heart's content. We will not, of course, get to every amazing thing in here, but boy, I'm going to try to squeeze in a lot tonight or today or tomorrow, whenever you're watching this recast. Of course, you can also go to our patreon.com/Anomaly Archives page, where you can sign up either for free or at $1 a month, $2 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month, or $20 a month. If you sign up at the Anomaly Academy Cadet tier, that's $10 a month or higher, you get access to our live monthly Anomaly Academy presentations and upcoming presentation by Adam Gorightly this coming Sunday. That's May 25th at 5 p.m. Central Time is his lecture, The Bob Beck Collection, Space Age Photos from the Past. So you can find out more about that over at our website, anomalyarchives.org, where we have information about these monthly events, as well as, like I say, the Patreon over at patreon.com/Anomaly Archives. And yes, we really hope you'll support us and go check out this coming event this Sunday. It'll be streamed live, and you can participate in the Q&A afterwards. And our good friend Adam Gorightly will be presenting on a plethora of contactee photos from the Flying Saucer Classic era. Looking forward to that a great deal. Well, it is always sad to report on the passing of folks from the classic UFO era, or anybody, of course, who's given their expertise, their knowledge, their obsession, all the things that drive seekers and us Forteans, us anomalists, into the realms of the weird. Over at anomalous.com, you can read Patrick Queege's obituary for his good dear friend, and you can find out, of course, more about that dear friend, Dennis Stacy, over at our website, anomalyarchives.org. Dennis's obituary reads, I am heartbroken to report that my good friend and colleague Dennis Stacy passed away on Sunday, May 11th at the age of 78. He was born in Gorman, Texas, and graduated from the University of Texas with a degree in journalism. Dennis was married to Julie Kelleher for almost 30 years before she passed away in 2018. They had one son, Kevin Stacy. Though Dennis spent his entire life in Texas, he traveled extensively internationally, including to Loch Ness, where together we interviewed Nessie witnesses and researchers in the late 1990s and wrote a series of articles for Omni on the subject. A mutual fascination with the UFO subject had kicked off our friendship at a MUFON conference in 1993. At that time, Dennis was the editor of the monthly UFO journal, MUFON UFO Journal, a position he held from 1985 to 1997. Due to our mutual admiration for old issues of Flying Saucer Review, we decided to start publishing a Fortean journal entitled The Anomalist in 1994, ceasing until in 2010. And this website, anomalous.com, which began in 1996. Dennis received the 1995 Donald E. Kehoe Journalism Award for a 6-part series on UFOs that appeared in Omni. He was the author of The Marfa Lights, A Viewer's Guide, co-author with me of The Field Guide to UFOs, and co-editor with Hillary Evans of UFOs 1947 to 1957, 50 Years of Flying Saucers, among other works. And from 2005 to 2021, he served as the publisher of Anomalous Books. Goodbye, dear friend. Rest in peace, says Patrick Queege. Yes, I was honored to have had the opportunity to interact with Dennis Stacy a few times over the years. I believe it was when he was, I probably first interacted with him, at least in my current memory, when he hosted the 36th National UFO Conference in San Antonio in 1999. And then again at the 37th National UFO Conference, NUFOC, in Corpus Christi in the year 2000. I remember staying up way too late and drinking way too much red wine with Dennis and Jim Mosley at that conference, where I accepted the responsibility for hosting and organizing the 2001 National UFO Conference that unfortunately did not happen due to the events of 2001, 9/11, September 11th, 2001. But I last saw Dennis in person in 2006 when I visited San Antonio to view Craig Woolheater's Bigfoot in Texas exhibit at the UTSA Institute of Texan Cultures, which unfortunately, as of April of this year, has been demolished. This was a maybe not historic in the literal sense, but a very important structure and institution. The institution survives, but the interesting structure that was a museum of Texan cultures is no longer there physically, though it's having a new place rebuilt. But Dennis was such a generous host as we were visiting his town, my hometown, that he drove me, Lauren Coleman, and Craig Woolheater around San Antonio, showing us a variety of places that were important to him, some of which included Tom Slick's Southwest Research Institute, as well as Whitley Strieber's Secret School, and various sites from the life of Tom Slick. Lauren, I think, and Craig got a behind-the-scenes look at San Antonio Zoo with special views of the whooping cranes and okapis. And I last spoke to Dennis a couple of years ago. Sadly, he was in hospital at the time. This is still during, I think, the COVID lockdowns. But farewell, good friend. As mentioned, he was the author of a number of books, including Circles of Note, A Reader's Guide to the Crop Circle Phenomenon, UFO Mystery, edited by him and Hillary Evans, and the Marfa Lights Viewer's Guide, A World History of UFOs, and of course the Field Guide to UFOs by he and Patrick Queege, who wrote that touching obituary for his friend. And this classic book, 14 Times Presents UFO, 1947-1997, 50 Years of Flying Saucers. Farewell, good friend. You will be missed, and your contributions are being preserved. Dennis did give the Anomaly Archives a number of donations in the form of UFO ephemera, communications, materials from his time when he was running the MUFON UFO Journal and so forth, as well as some various books that he donated as well. Sad that I didn't get to see him one more time. Well, recently at the Austin UFO Disclosure Meetup, some attendees there who I got to know a little bit better asked me, after I expressed my various cynical, paranoid perspectives on the state of UFO affairs in the world right now, as much as I do feel that there is a real important sea change happening that has its positive aspects, they rightly asked me, well, who do you trust? So who do I trust? Who does Miles trust when it comes to getting information about UFOs and the paranormal and that sort of thing? Well, first and foremost, and most significantly in terms of on a regular basis, that would be good friend Micah Hanks, writer, podcaster, history fanatic, science enthusiast, and philosophy junkie. You, of course, can find more about Micah Hanks at micahhanks.com. That's MICAHHANKS.com. He does the weekly podcast, The Micah Hanks Show, as well as the X podcast. If you're an X subscriber, you get a second show each week, and he does great work. I really can't speak highly enough of Mr. Hanks. He does an excellent job and has been doing so for a very long time. So as much as I like to tout that there are some new guns, some new young folks entering the field of ufology, UAPology, U-apology, I think it's important to recognize those people who have been doing this long enough to have a much broader sense and appreciation of this field and its history and its intricacies. And Micah is that person. He is the person I trust most when it comes to getting me and everybody else the latest news and information related to UFOs, UAP, and the paranormal and cryptozoology and all points in between. And with his co-founding of The Debrief, that's thedebrief.org, THEDEBRIEF.org. There is a great resource for the latest news in science, space, aerospace, tech, defense, and there's a newsletter there, and they promote a number of podcasts that they record with their staff and personnel. A great outfit that you can find all kinds of interesting and important information, breaking news stories. But again, I really cannot recommend enough Micah Hanks's work. The other person, of course, that I would recommend the most is, besides Micah Hanks, is Jacques Vallée. You can find out more about him, of course, at his website, jacquesvallée.net, and in his books, the Forbidden Science journals. But if you go to our website, you can find links to our files on people like Micah Hanks, people like Jacques Vallée, links to all their important works and news articles, as well as a plethora of videos that, Vallée is not one who has really done that many presentations that have until recently been available, but as he's now published his 6th volume of the Forbidden Science Journals, which is quite probably the final volume in that series, he's been making the rounds. And while this page doesn't have an absolute exhaustive list of all his video appearances, I think you'll appreciate what you'll find there. And of course, we do have pages for some of the books that we carry in our 7,000 plus title book collection. The 6 volumes of his Forbidden Science Journals of Jacques Vallée, each one covering a decade of his life and his research into these strange phenomena. These are some of the most valuable things available to educate yourself about the UFO scene and its long history and the many important aspects to investigate when diving into it. And I would say Jacques is the other person I most respect, if not the most respect, when it comes to UFOs. And that is not to say that any of these people mentioned don't have their problems or things that I might speak to criticize them, but more often than not, I would look to them for guidance and perspective on these important subjects. I've been telling our viewers here for the past year and a half, maybe 2 years now. I've been slowly making my way through Forbidden Science 5, the journals of Jacques Vallée for the years 2000 to 2009. Well, I finally finished it and was very happy to have completed that book. Ah, man, so many notes, so much important information. I can't begin to tell you. But the thing that is, of course, the most notable, perhaps, and sad about it is it ends with what actually would have begun the beginning of volume 6, which starts with the year 2010. It ends the fifth volume with really the demise of the passing of his wife Janine, who was his constant companion for the majority of his life, and who helped him in his research and his perspectives, and who, should also go noted in the efforts that he undertook in journeying around the world investigating the UFO phenomenon. And it was very hard to read. She battled a particular form of brain cancer, I think, that most people do not survive for very long, but for whatever reasons, through their sheer love and strength of will, she hung on for quite some time and had a wonderful farewell with him. But it's still very, very emotional. I cried my eyes out. But I have now started reading Forbidden Science 6, Scattered Castles, which covers the years 2010 to 2019. And as Volume 5 started down the road of the revelations about OSAP and Jacques' involvement with Bass, the Bigelow aerospace company that was the winner of the secret project that is now known as the Pentagon's UFO program, but which really had more to do with, well, that's still up for debate. But suffice to say, these 2 volumes cover that period in depth. And while there's still much that I think can't or has not yet been reported, I'm very much looking forward to continuing to barrel through Forbidden Science 6 and find what amazing revelations might be awaiting me there. And those are some past pictures of my the first 4 volumes, which I have in hardback. The rest I do not, unfortunately. There are also rare special editions of the Forbidden Science journals that feature color insert plates. I've only seen these in the personal collection of a good friend of mine. So when asked about, who do I trust and where do I get my UFO information, what set me off on my cynical, paranoid rant to the group assembled for that meetup was, of course, what I've ranted about before, and we'll probably touch on again in a little bit, is the dominance of the UFO discourse by people who somehow all seem connected in very deep, dark, murky ways to certain rich global tech people. Let's just say that. Well, you know who I'm talking about. And how it seems like there's a certain tech bro takeover of the UFO scene, and how, as much as I admire the interviews and the breadth of knowledge of hosts such as Jesse Michaels, their close association with said tech billionaires really should be concerning to all of us. And it goes well beyond that into political realms that I will leave it to you to research, but we have touched on it and we will probably touch on it again today. But when it comes to the various podcasts that I consume on a fairly regular basis, not so much because I think they're the best, but because they are doing daily shows and often find that information that I have not yet come across, which I greatly appreciate. I've, of course, mentioned before Klaus and Garrett's Patterns Tell Stories podcast, but these particular shows I wanted to highlight just in terms of like the interestingness here. But so, okay. What's his name? Patrick Scott Armstrong hosts the Vetted podcast, which you can find on YouTube, and which does sometimes multiple shows a day. In fact, just in the last 24 hours, he's posted, I think it looks like he's got one going right now, a live one. And these are the kinds of things I know of friends who criticize these shows because they just basically are reporting on, as I am doing now, other shows. And that sometimes feels like, well, they're just cannibalizing other people's content. But, they are providing a service, and I do find utility in that service. And that is that, as I say, sometimes I find leads to news articles that I think are important, or get a heads up on things that I think are being misinterpreted as they are making their way through the UFO community. But yeah, you can find out more about Patrick Scott Armstrong over at his website for the show, vetted, vetted.show. That's vetted.show, which of course has links to all of his content. But yeah, you probably would interface most likely with him, through his at Vetted podcast on YouTube. But some folks might not realize this, but I believe he's still in Texas. I think he was in Austin for a time. And if you go to this other website that I don't think he's producing anymore, but he used to be the podcast host for a food show called Lone Star Plate. So you can find information about him at lonestarplate.com, lonestarplate.show/Patrick. And yeah, he was podcasting a foodie type show for some time. And it looks like when the big revelations that happened with the UAP hearings, that's when he transitioned over to focusing on UFOs. But I find it interesting that he has a very, very popular podcast. Let's see, what are his numbers? Right now, he's got almost 55,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel with over 768 videos, a very strong membership base. And he's one of the few podcasts who I've seen promoted by MSN.com. I'm not sure how that works, but I imagine it's through sheer numbers. But I've also seen that he has tried to roll out a number of channels that utilizing YouTube's new auto dubbing feature, where he'll have German language translations or Spanish language translations of his podcast, his show. And it's an amazing technology, and it's going to, as I was saying in previous shows, going to make the scene even more complicated. But yeah, check it out over at YouTube. But like I mentioned, he is in Texas, I think, still, and formerly was in Austin. I'll kind of bring this all around to why I'm bringing that up. But another show that I enjoy is by Pavel Ibarra over at Psycho at Vivo podcast. That's another YouTube channel. And he's been doing it for, I think, maybe a year longer than Patrick. And similarly, it's a kind of rehash, regular daily reporting, sometimes multiple times a day, on different UFO related issues. And he's reporting from down in Mexico. And I mostly appreciate everything he contributes. Like any of these podcasters, sometimes they say things or focus on things that I'm just like, oh, please, come on. Don't you know better than that? But again, these are some of the newer people to the scene, and, we all have a lot to learn from each other. But really, really like Pavel and what he has to say, and think he's generally doing a very good job. And another fellow who I've interacted with a little happens to be a science fiction fantasy writer, and that is Jack Connor. You can find out more about him and his books over at jackconnorbooks.com. That's JACKCONNER books.com. And yes, he's a fantasy and science fiction, I guess also a horror writer. who also does yet another daily podcast YouTube show over at Cosmic Road. That's youtube.com/@CosmicRoad. And again, lots of helpful information, interesting shows and news, things sometimes that I miss, always interesting. And like I say, and so he also, I believe he very briefly ran the Austin MUFON group, but was, I think, maybe headquartered out of Round Rock. That's north of Austin. I believe he's still in Texas and still churning out these daily videos. So it's just, I find it all very, very interesting. Now, I want to bring this all up in the context of something I was just made aware of, and that is actually, I guess it was this Mediaite.com article. YouTube drops its first ever podcast chart. See who made the top 100. This is for May 2025. Technically, it's for May 12th through May 18th. Oh, wait, it's just changed. All right. Interesting. Okay, well. So the information I was going to report on, this is, I guess, a new week. So they're going to be doing a new week on this. Let me show. So yes, here's the change. So, no surprise, Joe Rogan was number one in the weekly top podcast shows for the United States according to YouTube's stats last week. But this just changed in the last hour or two after I was compiling my notes for this. But yeah, so I'm sure these have all shifted. So this won't even relate to what I'm going to say. But yeah, they have links and little thumbnails for all these different shows. And I'm not going to be doing a regular leaderboard kind of report on this. But yeah, if you, over at this article, YouTube drops its first ever podcast chart over at Mediaite.com. They actually, got the screenshot for the list for May 5th through May 11th. And as you can see, Joe Rogan was in the top and Kill Tony was in number 2. Well, what I find interesting about this is, okay, so with that period of time, there were out of those 100, I was expecting to see certain shows there that I did not see. So I'm very curious, and maybe there's some very obvious reasons why the shows I was expecting to see there weren't there. But yeah, so I would say there were less than 10 shows in the top 100 that I would say have regular UFO related content or regular paranormal related content. That kind of surprised me. I was expecting certain podcasts to be much higher in these rankings. However, unsurprisingly was, as I'm saying, the fact that Joe Rogan was at the top. And at the time, the Kill Tony was the second highest rated top podcast for that week. And just interestingly enough, again, both of those shows produced out of here in Austin, or at least recorded here in Austin. One being a comedy show, and some would say Joe Rogan is a comedy show. But anyway, among the other shows that I would say do at least occasional UFO related shows were, like, as I said, Joe Rogan in the top 1 slot. This is, of course, for the week of May 5th through May 11th. Sean Ryan show, which I don't think necessarily really focuses on that subject, but obviously has had some very big names in the UFO field on that show. And Tim Pool's show, Timcast IRL, I guess it's in real life, Timcast in real life. Interestingly enough, Tim Pool for that week has 2 different channels, 2 different podcasts that were in the top 100. Now, Tim Pool is considered a controversial, political, conspiracy-oriented show host. Some say he's not as conservative or right-wing as the quote-unquote left-wing media promotes him as, but whatever. But Tim Pool has definitely had on a regular basis UFO-related content and has appeared on Joe Rogan talking about UFOs, so I would include him there. And he was at the 13th slot out of the top 100. At the 21 slot out of 100, Reality Check with Ross Coulthard. Now, obviously, that is a very UFO-specific show. If he's doing other shows that aren't UFO-related, I'm not coming across them. The algorithms are not showing up to me. And then the Lex Friedman podcast at 22, just after Ross Coulthart, and the Julian Dory podcast at 45. Again, not specifically UFO related, but definitely has a lot of UFO shows. And I would put it in that, I guess, and maybe he's not a tech bro, but like, just there's a certain manosphere bro kind of milieu. And lastly, not lastly, excuse me, second to last, the Y-Files Operation Podcast. Now, the Y-Files is yet another podcast that I have seen, like Vetted, being promoted to me through MSN.com. And again, I'm not sure how that works, but you might know the Y-Files as that show with the the talking goldfish sidekick. Some people love the fish, some people hate the fish, but I find it to be a very humorous and entertaining podcast that deals a lot with UFOs and the paranormal. In fact, that's pretty much its focus. And then coming in last out of the 8 or so, now maybe there were more that I just didn't recognize as UFO paranormal oriented, but the Extra Anormal podcast came in at 87. And this is a Spanish language podcast. So kind of interesting to note. But yeah, so I find all that pretty interesting, and we'll probably post something on the website and maybe see, again, not going to be giving a regular scorecard on this kind of thing, but in terms of cargo culture, I think it's interesting to note. Well, we're going to take a break here and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. So continuing the theme of who do you trust when there's so much happening fast and furious right now with government coverage through the Rep Luna Transparency Office and its coverage of God knows everything from suspicious assassinations to COVID, 9/11, Epstein client list, and oh yeah, by the way, UFOs. There's been a lot of what's happening, what's going on, skiffs, hearings, what UFO hearing? JFK hearing. Yeah, so if you go to our Flipboard, there's a link to the most recent JFK hearing. I haven't had the time to dive into that. As I've said before, that is not necessarily my area of expertise, even though I have long been fascinated, as most people are, with that and the other suspicious, mysterious assassination rabbit holes. But among those who are doing near daily reporting on the subject of UFOs is Matt Laszlo, who has the Ask a Poll series of websites. And of course, the one that I've tracked most closely is that of Ask a Poll UAPs. That is literally AskAPOLUAPS.com, Ask a Poll's UAPs, Ask a Poll UAPs. Anyway, you can search for Matt Laszlo, Ask a Poll UFO, and you'll find it. And he's putting out near daily audio clips as he is there on Capitol Hill asking members of Congress and these various reps and senators and so forth for their opinions on what's going on. And often this leads kind of the UAP news cycle for these various daily UFO UAP reporting podcasts that I've been referencing in the previous segment. And I really appreciate the transcripts. It's almost every morning I'm looking through the transcript in the email or the website for Matt Laszlo's latest quick interviews with these folks. And they're, of course, it can be hard to track, but this person is doing very important work. But something of note, interestingly, is this. There's been a lot of hoopla about, of course, the fallout from Lou Elizondo's appearance emceeing the last UFO UAP hearing, such as it was, and the fact that there hasn't been the next UAP hearing that was supposed to happen. But at the last one, of course, he held up the photograph that turned out to be not what it looks like at first glance, but that was yet another misidentification of a mundane object for a quote-unquote UFO. But he's now out on the outs, possibly because of that or other reasons, with the UAP Disclosure Fund that was the organizer of the live stream for that event, and which has a lot of the same bigwigs that you've been seeing as part of all these different conferences and whatnot. Now, gosh, have I already skipped over some other stuff I wanted to mention? I think I have. But, well, some of the more recent bits over at the askapolluaps.com, episodes 360 and 361, number 360 with Rep. Eric Burleson on May 15th, and the same day, episode 361 with Rep. Anna Paulina Luna. So this group recently got briefings by ARROW, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, and the FBI UFO Working Group. And these, you can go and you can listen to the clips. Some of them are free, but basically it looks like the FBI wants a piece of the pie, a piece of the action. And as it turns out, these reps are basically suggesting that they feel like they're getting better information from the FBI than ARROW. And so one of the quotes, as you see here in the headline, makes us reconsider ARROW, is something that apparently Luna has said in the context of after they heard information from the FBI, and Burleson said that the FBI wants ARROW's funding. And the basics of it appear to be that, yeah, the FBI, as a long, well-established three-letter agency with its own wild and woolly history, has already the resources and processes in place to investigate UFOs, UAP from the perspective of their job of has there been some kind of federal crime committed. All of which could be very interesting. And of course, many skeptics and debunkers who doubt the reality of UFO sightings and especially doubt abduction claims have said, well, if these people are being abducted, shouldn't that be reported to the FBI? Anyway, all that aside, I would encourage you to go check out askapolluaps.com, Matt Laslow's work. But going back to somebody whose work I do really respect, that is Micah Hanks, his latest public episode, UFOs and Intelligence, FBI Briefings, Japan's ARROW, and DoD UAP Videos. As always, an excellent episode. But one of the things that he reminds us is that he and the debrief have been doing some of the best groundbreaking reporting on this, or at least getting the breaking news on these things, and reminds us that just a few months ago, back in February, the debrief had this article. The FBI confirms it has a secretive quote unquote UAP working group. That's what they internally call it. But the agents now worry their jobs could be in jeopardy. Of course, this was in light of all the Musk, Doge, Trump administration firings and budget cuts, and the situation with the new head of the FBI having previously talked about getting rid of the FBI. But Micah Hanks, as usual, is demonstrating that what they often are leading with information, breaking news that they are getting, that they are beating to the punch so many of these other, amateur journalists, these podcasters and whatnot. And from just briefly from this article from February, it says Ryan Graves, a former U.S. Navy pilot and co-founder of the advocacy group Americans for Safe Aerospace, expressed concerns on Monday that members of the FBI's UAP working group could be among the federal agents impacted by shifting dynamics under the new administration. In a statement provided to the debrief, Graves said his organization has worked over the past year and a half with, quote, a small team at the FBI called the UAP working group to investigate credible reports of UAP by trained observers like pilots and veterans, unquote, and to assist in determining where national security or aviation safety may have been impacted. Quote, witnesses who come to ASA always decide how their case is handled, but many want their reports investigated by the FBI's UAP working group, Graves said. And let's see. The article goes on to say, an FBI spokesperson with whom the debrief communicated via email on Monday confirmed that, quote, the FBI investigates unidentified anomalous phenomena when there is potential for a violation of federal law, particularly unlawful acts that could adversely affect our national interest, and to gather, share, and analyze intelligence to combat security threats facing the U.S. Now, all of this is just to remind folks again that Micah is a trained journalist doing good journalism, and that he is, as editor of the debrief.org, is really doing a great job. And I would highly recommend folks check out his podcast at micahhanks.com. Also, it's linked, of course, through the debrief.org. And this other recent episode from April 12th, Immaculate Confusion, Truth, Lies, and UAP Media Controversies, again, I think does the important job of making note of certain things that if you're just a surface level observer of the modern UFO UAP landscape, you may be missing certain key bits of information or be given a false sense of perspective. And one of those is in terms of this other quote unquote whistleblower, Robert Thompson. This is the Border Patrol fellow who News Nation, Ross Coulthart, and others have been promoting as a new whistleblower. Well, folks, don't you believe it? He first came out and whistleblew back in 2022. Guess who? Guess to whom? The debrief.org. That's right. The debrief.org first covered this. Their exclusive was back in May of 2022. And in their article by Tim McMillan, Micah Hanks, and Christopher Plain, titled Incursions at the Border, Homeland Security Agents Tell of Encounters with Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. There are a lot of important quotes there. You can read the article over at the debrief, but it's worth noting that, again, this quote unquote new whistleblower is not new as of 2025, but was new back in May of 2022. So just keep that in mind as you watch shows like Ross Coulthart's Reality Check and News Nation, etc. But I also wanted to, again, another person that's new to the field who's writing and reportage I respect, and I've mentioned many times, Tanner F. Boyle, whose blog Getting Spooked I highly recommend. In his Cystic Detective Update number 4 for May 13th, 2025, he wrote, quote, even more recently, calling back to my previous frustrations with Ross Coulthart, yet another whistleblower alleges incredible anomalous phenomena. This time it is Bob Thompson, a former Customs and Border Protection agent who talked with News Nation about studying strange events such as drones, portals, and other aerial anomalies at the U.S. border. Putting aside the obvious at this point, wrote, national security concerns, these allegations draw up. The timing is again curious. As the border, CBP, and DHS have become remarkably sensitive topics nationwide, what good does bringing UFOs into the conversation do? It dredges up paranoia, obfuscates the day-to-day material concerns that remain unaddressed, and leaves only science-fictional thrills in a newsroom that certainly has better things to do. As time passes, I am left feeling that Coulthart is the most opportunistic ghoul in a subject matter overrun with opportunism. Draw your own conclusions. Now, moving along to other alleged whistleblowers, beyond Robert Thompson, we have, of course, Matthew Brown. And again, I'm going to direct folks to the Patterns Tell Stories podcast by Klaus and Garrett. And this article, while originally I found it, thankfully, over at UFOfeed.com with the title, The Reason Matthew Brown's Testimony is Important, dated May 7th, 2025, which was basically, I believe, a capture from a Reddit thread. But thankfully, Klaus republished this on his blog, his website, tinyklaus.com. That's TINYKLAUS.com. Why Matthew Brown's testimony is important. Reposting my Reddit thread from our UFOs with some additional insight. Now, he starts by, saying it's understandable that some people find this testimony from Matthew Brown, that they're skeptical of it, uncertain of it. And this does get to my paranoid and cynical perspectives on things. And this is where probably why I like Klaus and Garrett's perspective so much. But I'll just read a little bit of this. You can find it, as I say, at tinyklaus.com. I've had major concerns about the involvement of Peter Thiel and Thiel Capital investor Jesse Michaels in the disclosure in the disclosure topic since I first realized what their relationship was. I published a Reddit post in January 2022 expressing my hesitation with embracing someone like Thiel. He has deep ties to the CIA, and his company Palantir had been embedded within Cambridge Analytica along with Facebook employees during the 2016 election. Cambridge Analytica waged military-grade psychological operations against the American public, and I fear he was attempting to do the same through American Alchemy and other online influence campaigns. And here he has a screenshot from Politico's article, Crypto Bros, UFOs, and NFTs Inside Peter Thiel's Senate Fundraising Tour. The article by Klaus goes on. I noted a 2022 Political article where Thiel had expressed interest in funding UFO research and a comment by Ross Coulthart stating that, quote, companies involved in data collection are actually interested in funding and investigating the phenomena. When there's a buck, there's a will. This was only about a month after the American Alchemy episode with Gary Nolan came out that put Jesse on the map, and he started getting every big name involved in the topic on his show from then on. After initially calling out a few things, and as uncomfortable as I was with the situation, I eventually shut my mouth for the greater good of the cause. Now, he goes on, and again, I would just say go read this article. It's linked multiple times in the Flipboard, and of course, the links to this and everything I talk about today and every day on every show are in the show notes on the Anomaly-Archives.org website. But there are much deeper parapolitical issues at play here, and I would urge you to contemplate these. But what he gets into is something that, while I'm not sure if this is definitive, it's something that's concerned me for some time, and that is the alleged connections between Peter Thiel and apps targeting UFO, UAP interested folks with the app and the website Enigma Labs. Continuing the article, despite their attempts at secrecy, it has been an open okay, wait a minute, I should go back. Well, so basically this all comes around, he's explicating the perceived feud between Jeremy Corbell and Michael Schellenberger and the release of the Immaculate Constellation report that Corbell provided to Congress, but which was attributed as being given to them by Michael Schellenberger, who's perceived by many as a problematic right-leaning former lefty who is obviously has very close ties to Peter Thiel and the Trump administration, at least in terms of being aligned with a lot of the rhetoric. But it all comes down to data collection. And I guess I'll just continue with where I was. Despite their attempts at secrecy, it has been an open secret for years now that Thiel was fundamental in funding the startup UFO reporting app Enigma Labs. It's a bit odd that someone who Chris Sharp's sources claim to be, quote, a key advocate for UAP transparency would want to hide their role in it altogether, but I digress. The Enigma Labs CEO has also insisted on anonymity, and once you scratch the surface of these relationships, it becomes pretty clear why. It turns out there is another monetary relationship between Thiel and quote-unquote Alex Smith that is even more concerning than co-founding an app that was essentially created to track experiencers. Alice Lloyd George, the CEO of Enigma Labs, is the great-granddaughter of former UK Prime Minister David Lloyd George. Like Thiel, she has spent a lot of time in venture capital funding various aerospace startups. Through her firm RRE Ventures, she was a principal investor in a satellite imaging company called Black Sky. This is also co-investor. Thiel is also co-investor in Black Sky through his firm Mithril Capital Management, and he's got screenshots showing all the background and research on this. Article goes on. Unsurprisingly, it also turns out that Thiel's Palantir Technologies is an investor and integration partner with Black Sky, with more quotes here. But what this gets to is he's suggesting that he's putting all this out there as a way of bolstering the narrative that Immaculate Constellation, this alleged massive AI-driven UFO, UAP information gathering and suppression technology architecture as related by this new alleged whistleblower Matthew Brown about this alleged system, Immaculate Constellation, that it seems likely connected to or synonymous or analogous to Black Sky and these other efforts by Thiel and the company through apps like Enigma Labs to gather up all this information. And it's been suggested that this is all an effort to beat out the legacy aerospace companies, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, and all these others, these defense contractors, these aerospace defense contractors that have, billion, possibly $1 trillion contracts with the military industrial complex. They are the military industrial complex, and that Thiel and Musk and others are positioning themselves to take the lead, take over, and with their companies, with their new defense contracts. At least that's my understanding of what I think Klaus is trying to say here. But you can go and make your own decision on this. However, I would also, you can go to our anomalyarchives.org website, the page for Matthew Brown information. And as Micah Hanks and others have said, I don't doubt that this fellow Matt Brown, is sincere in feeling like he is doing the right thing and coming forward with what he perceives as supporting these ideas that there's this vast conspiracy in the background that's manipulating our view of reality by denying us access to these most important evidence of these most important phenomena. However, and I, having not listened to the entire interview and having not really read that closely the Immaculate Constellation document, was surprised to learn that this all was revealed. Matt Brown found this in a folder on a server that was marked Shriver Wargame 2018. That's Shriver, SCHRIEVER, Wargame 2018. And that basically when he tried through normal channels to bring this to his superior's attention, he was laughed at and told, this is nothing, it's just a war game, basically. And the implication is that it's a war game that perhaps integrated the emerging at the time, this would be 2018, a year after the revelations of OSAP, ATIP, and Lou Elizondo coming out about all that. And so you can find some links to people's analysis of this situation. And as this one article by Carl Olinsalat, where is that from? That one's from medium.com, says, quote, some skeptics have suggested Brown might have misinterpreted a fictional scenario from the Shriver war games, which regularly simulate future conflict scenarios. If the document Brown encountered was merely a hypothetical exercise rather than an operational program description, the entire narrative would be significantly undermined. And then there's another link to ultra skeptic Jason Colavito. Let's see, where he says, whistleblower Matthew Brown claimed to have seen secret UFO documents labeled 2018 Shriver war game, the same war game David Grush claimed to have consulted on in the CV he provided to Congress. And this is something I was not aware of. I knew that Grush had provided a CV. I did not see the reference to this, but apparently it's there. And this is, I think, been confirmed by others. But Colavito goes on, however, the Shriver war game is a long-running annual military exercise established in 1998 that is publicly promoted and discussed by the Space Force each year. It is, quote, designed to explore critical space issues to include investigating the military utility of new space systems, identifying solutions to common challenges, and advancing space support, according to Space Force. And I found this quote rather interesting from somebody I'm not familiar with, Kevin Williamson, titled UAP, Intelligence, and Wargaming. He says, when someone Matthew Brown recently claimed to see UAP imagery labeled under this in a document tied to the 2018 Shriver war game. It raised a few flags for me, not of alarm, but of misinterpretation. Excuse me. As a professional wargamer, I'm familiar with the Shriver war game. It's a long-running USAF tabletop exercise focusing on space and cyber conflict. These types of games can often include imaginative world-building, unclassified scenario injects, and illustrative imagery to support play. They aren't intelligence products, but they can look like them if you don't understand the format. For example, it's entirely plausible that someone without a background in wargaming mistook fictional or illustrative content for real intelligence. I've seen it happen before. And with someone like David Grush having served as an advisor in earlier iterations of Shriver, it's easy to see how speculation can spiral without context. There is a more intriguing hypothesis that some of this is part of a structured alternate reality game, ARG-style framework, perhaps testing leak pathways or gauging public response to ambiguous data. While that's a stretch, it's not outside the realm of possibility in information operations. If you wanted to use the application of wargaming to test real-world populations at a psychological level, this is a very good way to do it. Regardless, this has been an entertaining thought experiment for me, and I hope it was entertaining for you. Yes, indeed. So, anyone who's followed my work for years, I have since at least 2001 been warning about the dangers and potential misuse and abuse of ARGs, or stealth and viral marketing techniques, but this alternate reality gaming framework, as this Kevin Williamson describes, in the realms of UFOs and the paranormal and conspiracy and espionage and intrigue. But yes, it does strike me as very odd that David Grush and apparently Lou Elizondo both worked on UAP for Space Force, and that this war game is somehow connected also to David Grush, and apparently included imagery or components that alluded to Lou Elizondo. So it does strike me as a possibility. I mean, I don't have any specific federal war game examples of this, but I'm sure some of you may recall years ago that there was either a state or federal wargaming program. It was an emergency exercise program that involved a fake zombie apocalypse. So again, if these kinds of war games incorporate known fictional elements or adaptations of real perceived things in the news and in the media, this could very well be what that is. I'm not saying definitively that that's the case, but it seems the simplest explanation to me that Matthew Brown has misinterpreted a fictional wargaming scenario for a reality that supports his belief system and those of so many of us who grew up or have recently been indoctrinated into this modern myth. And all of this goes to what I was saying, that there's been a lot of issues with Lou Elizondo lately. Here on this vetted podcast episode, bombshell allegations against Lou Elizondo. This changes everything. Now, Patrick at Vetted, he's like everybody. He does the worst clickbait titles, but sometimes they're apropos. But this particular video is a collection of clips that relate to criticism of Lou Elizondo, or that point out very strange connections. Like in this case, there are at least two different video interviews, I think, where Lou Elizondo openly speaks of his having worked with David Grush for Space Force on the subject of UAPs. I think the quote here is, "I worked with Dave in Space Force. I don't know if that's public knowledge, but what the hell." And then this other, from a Reddit thread from 6 months ago, Elizondo states that he and Grush, quote, managed certain aspects of the UAP effort for U.S. Space Force. Again, I can't watch every interview. There's just so much going on. And that's why I do appreciate these other folks who are interviewing, and then these other folks who then are publicizing these kinds of discussions in the UFO social media sphere. Another strange one that happened recently is, not that I think this person should be trusted, Richard Doty, known apathy disinformationalist, who of course is notorious for his part in the Paul Benowitz affair. Quote, I was offered a job by the Space Force where Lou Elizondo worked to work with him spreading disinformation. Now, again, I do not endorse this or endorse anything Richard Doty says. He's been trying desperately to reform his image. I don't think he deserves to be forgiven. Perhaps he is just like any of us with a passion and an interest in this subject, and that he too, like Bill Moore, was forced? No, cajoled? Well, he was employed, but his employers made him do something that, as far as I'm concerned, violated the civil liberties of poor Paul Benowitz. You decide, but yeah, that's just more of the wild and crazy stuff that's been going on. Gosh, I don't know if I'm going to get to the other things I wanted to talk about, but yeah, let's take a break real quick here, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back, and yeah, I did forget to bring up a certain subject, and that is the release of the Archives of the Impossibles 2025 official videos on the Rice University's Humanities YouTube page. Yeah, you can find information about this over at anomalyarchives.org. We've got a whole page for that and the previous events, and we've embedded the playlist for all the lectures there. And you can follow that over to YouTube, where you can find the playlist there. And my gosh, it is just so fantastic. I know I've already been promoting this to people, and I would urge everyone to go check that out. And one of the most important panels among the wealth of important material there is the Experiencer Metadata Project panel discussion. So there's so many different videos in that playlist. Strangely, all the videos are still unlisted. I guess for whatever reason, they wanted to keep them out of the main feed of the Rice Humanities YouTube channel page, but the playlist is public, and I suspect this is why they're not yet getting as many views as they should. Maybe somebody needs to remind them. Anyway, I've already been telling folks to go watch the Experiencers and AOTI Metadata Research Panel video in particular, but like I say, they're all good. There's two different lectures, one in this panel discussion and one separately in a different the next day from Kim Ingalls. Really recommend this material highly. It is, as I've said, there's been, ever since the 2017 campaign that has been pushed by the likes of Elizondo, Chris Mellon, etc., we have seen a de-emphasizing of quote-unquote classic contact-oriented aspects of the UFO phenomena, what has previously been called alien abduction and other contact modalities. But I'm so glad to see that there's finally important work that is very similar to work that I and my colleagues were urging and wanting to do ourselves with the Anomaly Archives as far back as 20 plus years ago when we founded the Anomaly Archives, wanting to do advanced textual analysis of all the contact experiencer narratives, as well as the wealth of UFO research material out there. And this is now happening with the help of AI assistive technology. So really encourage everybody to go check that out. And again, you can go to our Anomaly Archives webpage for information on that. So gonna have to blow through the rest of this stuff here as fast as I can, but there's a bunch of good material that is linked through the Flipboard, including several book reviews I wanted to make you aware of. And this one is a video vlog by Professor Wham, who, of course, you've undoubtedly found presentations of that she's done for the Anomaly Archives, both in our 2020 Streamathon and the launch of our 2024 Anomaly Academy monthly online presentations. And this one is on the classic strange religious text known as OAPSE. That's OAHSPE, OAPSE. And her title, her vlog is a presentation that she gave after she did a stint with the Library of Congress. And it's called OAPSE, A Study in American Polygenetic Race Theory. Now, I have not had the chance to finish this yet, but I am always intrigued by everything Professor Wham has to say, and I would encourage you to go check that out as well. It looks like it's about an hour and 17 minutes, or is that more like an hour and 17 minutes. So go check that out. You can go to her website, professorwham.com, or to her YouTube channel for Professor Wham. That's WHAM. All right, another book review I'd encourage you to go check out. This one over at thereader.mitpress.mit.edu, The Silver Bridge, Gray Barker's Psychic Travelogue. The first book-length exploration of the Mothman sightings, The Silver Bridge, is also something much stranger and more expansive. This is by Gabriel McKee, who is, I believe, the author of, yes, The Saucerian, UFOs, Men in Black, and the Unbelievable Life of Gray Barker. Gray Barker is a fascinating subject person in the classic UFO era, flying saucer area. And I'm so glad that somebody has done a book on him. I cannot wait to read this book by Gabriel McKee. So go check that out. And this other book review is over at the SUAPS website. That is the Society for UAP Studies.org. SUAPS, SUAPS, Society for UAP Studies.org. RET's Demonic, a review of The First and Last Deception, Aliens, UFOs, AI, and the Return of Eden's Demise. This review is by Michael E. Zimmerman, and the book is by Dennis O'Connor. And SUAP's founder, Michael Sifone, is one of the presenters that you can see in that Rice University Archives of the Impossible conference video playlist that we mentioned previously. Now, of course, I have mentioned Tanner F. Boyle and his Getting Spooked blog. Well, he is the author of this book that I still have not had the chance to read, but I am very much looking forward to, and that is The Fortean Influence on Science Fiction, Charles Fort and the Evolution of the Genre. The fascinating topic. I can't wait to get this book and read it. In the meantime, you can read this book review that's circa December of 2023 over at fortiana-blog.blogspot.com, which is the Retro Fortiana blog, Andrew May's Fortiana blog, quote unquote, focusing on the weirder fringes of history and other old-fashioned stuff. But interestingly enough, if you're still not convinced, you can go to Getting Spooked blog, which is tannerfboyle.substack.com, where he has a new post, A Fortean Emergence, the Early SF Fortiana Relationship, a sample chapter from his book, The Fortean Influence on Science Fiction, covering the life and work of anomalous Charles Hoy Fort and the literature that spun off his writings. Thank you, Tanner. Can't wait to finally get to read something from this book. And this is so nice of you to put forth this chapter from that work. Moving right along to the subject of modern AI-related problems, we have this excellent article over at rollingstone.com. People are losing loved ones to AI-fueled spiritual fantasies. Self-styled prophets are claiming they have awakened chatbots and accessed the secrets of the universe through ChatBT by somebody with my own name, Miles. That's Miles Klee, published this article over at Rolling Stone, and it's gotten a lot of press. And while I think it is behind a paywall, you can, for free, go to the QAA podcast website, or that's QAApodcast.com, which will redirect you to, I think it's QAnonanonymous.com. But anyway, these are the podcasters who I highly recommend, who put out great content, at least 2 podcasts or more a week, one for free and others for a premium. And this episode 323, God, the Devil, and AI, featuring Miles Klee, also features, I believe, let's see, well, it doesn't say so in the show notes here, but I believe it features Annie Kelly, who, of course, is the researcher and writer who interviewed me for, among other things, that New York Times op-ed that I appeared in. This is a great episode, fascinating stuff, very disturbing. If you weren't worried about AI already, this gives you a whole new bunch of reasons to be concerned and why there should be guardrails on that industry immediately. So go check that out. Again, keeping in line with our modern AI problems is this one from Diana Pasulka over at her Godsend Substack. It's dwpasulka.substack.com. Norbert Weiner saw this coming. Who? One of the fathers of AI, spoke to us from the 1940s and 50s. It's somebody who I was not aware of, but is of note in these dangerous, worrisome, AI-fueled times. Just briefly from this very short article she wrote, in 1947, he refused military contracts and called on other scientists to do the same. He believed that knowledge used without ethical restraint would lead not to human flourishing, but to dehumanization and destruction. And apparently he wrote a book in 1950 called The Human Use of Human Beings. This was a shift in his writing, as he had been writing for technical audiences, and now he wanted to reach the general public. He warned that automation without ethical responsibility would not liberate humanity, but trap it. Quote, "The world of the future will be an ever more demanding struggle against the limitations of our intelligence, not a comfortable hammock in which we can lie down to be waited upon by our robot slaves." Elon Musk would disagree. Anyway, yes, there's a brief article that you can check out over at Diana Pasulka's Godsend Substack. And this one, speaking of AI, this is from realitysandwich.com, Lucid Dreaming AI and the End of Dream Interpretation. Now, when I first came across this, I was like, oh gosh, this is advocating for... No. It is not advocating for the use of AI in interpreting dreams. It's talking about using AI the way it should be used, as a tool in service to humanity. And in this case, you on a personal level. And it puts forth a lot of very helpful and interesting ideas, not least the crux of which is interpreting your dream, not afterwards, after the dream. You're interpreting your lucid dreams inside the dream. And this is certainly something I should have been contemplating long ago, but I've never had enough lucid dream experiences that lasted long enough to attempt this. But my gosh, I suspect I will start doing so now, hopefully, fingers crossed. But it's basically this idea of using AI as a way of a memory tool and keeping us reminded of things that we like when we come across, when we record something new about our dreams, that this kind of a tool could be like, oh, does this resonate or remind you of this that you dreamed before? Now, obviously, if you're an avid dream recorder, a dream journaler, you undoubtedly have had those moments where you're like, oh, I dreamed this thing. And then later, as you're leafing through, you realize that you've dreamed about that thing before, and maybe it's evolved over time, or there's a lot of very insightful thoughts in writing in this article that I would urge you to take a look at. As it says, interpretation begins inside the dream. Here's the radical turn. Interpretation doesn't begin the morning after. It begins while you're still dreaming. And there's some great examples here. This is a very good article. I'm glad that I took the time to read it and didn't go away with the false assumption that I had about it. Keeping with consciousness research as a theme, this one over at scipost.org. That's PSYPOST, SciPost, the latest psychology and neuroscience discoveries. Excuse me, is this excellent article about some very interesting research. Study links anomalous experiences to subconscious connectedness and other psychological traits. There's some new research that is very interesting. Quote, anomalous experiences are a broad and heterogeneous class of phenomena that simply have in common that they are things that people sometimes experience that are outside the conventional framework of understanding of how the world operates. I noticed many years ago that clients in my practice as a clinical psychologist who showed indications of high subconscious connectedness seemed to spontaneously report various anomalous experiences more commonly than many other clients. Quote, what surprised me most was to see how many adults have certain anomalous experiences again and again, Paulson told SciPost. The most common of these repeated experiences was déjà vu. That is, the sense that what one is experiencing in the present moment has happened before, when that is not possible. Well, that's making an assumption. About 60% of people in the U.S. national population samples reported having had déjà vu at least a few times, and between 40 and 50% of all the people surveyed reported that they had had at least a few times since correctly being stared at before looking, having had premonition that came true, and objects oddly disappearing and showing up later in places where they had already looked for them. Yes, I think many of us have had those kinds of experiences. But this research is very intriguing. It's a good lengthy article about this, and does link to the original work, which is titled Anomalous Experiences Are Associated with High Subconscious Connectedness, and was published April 17th of this year. So you'll want to go check that out. But I think this is the important work, especially as it relates to experiencers, but all of us are experiencers. I know not everybody believes this, but I have long felt from the data and my own experience and talking to people, everyone is psychic to a greater or lesser degree, and that it is not uncommon. And this is why I was saying to a new acquaintance just recently that the very badly designed Roper poll, the one that claimed that 1 in 50 Americans has been abducted because of the vague things, that the checklist of vague anomalous experiences that the survey included, all that shows is that anomalous experience is much more common than most people suppose. All right, quickly moving right along over at salon.com. Is intelligence a human construct? Octopus suggests it's time to think differently about animals. This is a nice, good overview of how popular the use of thinking about the octopus and its intelligence ability gives us to think about the nature of our own intelligence, the nature of how we would interact with other intelligent species, and as well as whether anthropomorphizing or projecting human traits onto the animal kingdom is always a bad thing. It is identified as a bias in our research and our thinking about these subjects, but it also balances it by saying sometimes it might actually be helpful. And it gives the example of several different movies, series, and documentaries that have come out recently, and how popular octopuses have become, and including The Soul of an Octopus, a surprising exploration in the wonder of consciousness, the Netflix documentary My Octopus Teacher, and Remarkably Bright Creatures, another video, and this new one, Octopus, that's on Prime Video. Something else you might find interesting over at dailygrail.com, Jeremy Renner's near-death experience. Quote, I got a wink from the universe saying, you got to see behind the curtain. This written by Daily Grail's Greg Taylor, and of course is all about the actor Renner's recent appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show, which is of course embedded here, and you can go and watch a clip or the whole thing. And, the near-death experience is another important anomalous human experience, exceptional human experience in the parlance of parapsychologist Ray White, EHE's exceptional human experiences, that I think are very relevant. And as I like to urge others to look into the work of Dr. Kenneth Ring on near-death experiences, his book, The Omega Project, which I believe was the sequel to his Heading Towards Omega, I believe was the near-death exclusive book, but The Omega Project was the book where he started incorporating UFO contact experience data and comparing it to the near-death experience. And it is a very important work. I can't recommend that highly enough. Okay, down to the wire here. Yes, as you know, libraries are under assault, and the Library of Congress is no different. This one from NPR, Librarian of Congress firing his latest move in upheaval of U.S. cultural institutions. Very upsetting, but in a weird, strange light, it was It was Joe Rogan's podcast that made me aware of Bob Gimlin. That's not the Bob Gimlin associated with the Patterson Gimlin Bigfoot footage that's so legendary, but the Bigfoot-oriented YouTube channel of a young Bob Gimlin. So this young fellow, Bob Gimlin, Gymlan, was a guest on Joe Rogan. And while I haven't watched the whole interview, it turned me on to his YouTube channel. And one of his latest posts is called "A Bigfoot Sighting Documented in the Library of Congress." Well, you can go to Bob Gimlin's YouTube page. That's youtube.com/@BOBGYMLAN. That's Bob Gimlin, and find a wealth of very interesting, quirky YouTube videos that he's produced over the last few years or so, that if you can stand his cadence and his delivery style, I think you'll thoroughly enjoy. I have really enjoyed these. They're not all exclusively about Bigfoot or though they're mostly about cryptids, but there's some other kind of paranormal oriented stuff. It's a very odd YouTube channel and podcast. Meanwhile, speaking of cryptids, over at SharonAHill.com, Strange Claims Adjuster, she has put out Pop Crystid Spectator number 16. I must read you this introduction here, and while I agree with what she's saying, and I'm very happy to read this, and I don't totally agree with it, but it is, I think, it puts into interesting perspective everything we've been discussing here and today and in general. Pop crystid mainstreamification. The pop crystid idea is a very hard sell to the stalwart traditional cryptid enthusiast, the person who still believes that we will discover a real-life Bigfoot someday and holds that the concept of cryptozoology deserves a scientific approach. As I've expressed in countless instances, that view is anachronistic compared to the modern version of cryptozoology, which is more about any mysterious creature or thing you can imagine. Modern online cryptids have little to do with zoology, except in speculative and fictional aspects. The evolution has happened online. Prior to the 1990s, information about cryptids could be found in person, print, or on TV. Most importantly, cryptids are stories transmitted locally, directly from one person to another. The internet changed everything as quote-unquote local became almost meaningless. There were already a very few cryptids that were known nationally or worldwide, Bigfoot, Yeti, Nessie, Champ. But then came the late 1990s and cryptids became a worldwide sensation thanks to web pages, shared video, and social media. Without the internet, you would not have the phenomena of the chupacabras, the Flatwoods Monster, or the Fresno Nightcrawler. Now, the Flatwoods Monster, come on now. Well, okay. No, I get what she's saying. Back to what she's saying. Quote, from there, the concept of local mystery monsters was embraced and shared. The reasons why it has become so popular and mainstream is a fascinating cultural story. I've already mentioned the festivals, the tourism tie-ins, the commodification, and the diversification of the cryptid scene. However, the traditional cryptozoology enthusiast ignores or rejects this. They insist that their version is the correct one that needs to be rehabilitated from the sensationalistic commercialism and separated from paranormalism. I do not believe that will ever happen. I don't think it can happen because zoologically based cryptozoology doesn't make sense anymore. What may happen is that a certain niche area that treats cryptid lore as folk zoology will grow. In that sense, we're talking about post-cryptid cryptozoology, not the discovery of new animals, but about the cultural aspects, interpretation, and meaning of strange animal encounters. That is an endlessly fruitful branch of this interesting tree. Meanwhile, the number of festivals grows each year. The mainstreamification evolution of new cryptids continues, and the commodification becomes more lucrative. That's over at SharonAHill.com. And lastly, from the archives is this somebody's upload of The Science Behind Alien Abductions and UFO Encounters, 60 Minutes Australia, which is all about alien abduction and features, as seen here, Canadian researcher Michael Persinger, who is no longer with us, but who, of course, gave us ideas like the TST, the tectonic strain theory, the God helmet, and his various ideas about the nature of electromagnetics importance in the study of UFO encounters, and especially the brain stimulation through electromagnetics of what he described as and believed was hallucinations. But I think his ideas are valid, even though I think they can go beyond that reductionistic, materialistic interpretation. All right, folks, that's going to be it for now. Thank you so much. It's an hour and a half. My Lord, that's what happens when you've gone a week and a half or 2 weeks since the last show. All right, so don't forget, we've got coming up, go over to our patreon.com/Anomaly Archives page, and you can find information about signing up. And if you're an Anomaly Academy Cadet tier patron, you can tune in to our live presentation by Adam Gorightly, the Bob Beck Collection, Space Age Photos from the Past, this Sunday. Enjoy, take care, beware,